back to Law and Crime. We are still discussing our big trial of the day, which is in Georgia. This is the murder trial for Jennifer and Joseph Rosenbaum, accused of abusing and killing their 2-year-old foster child, Layla Marie. Jennifer is facing charges of malice and felony murder, child cruelty, aggravated assault, and aggravated battery. Joseph is charged with second-degree murder and accused of leaving Layla in his wife's care when he allegedly knew she was abusing the child. On the stand so far have been several workers from the Department of Family and Child Services. One of those that happened this morning that took the stand was the foster care investigator. She was in charge of interviewing and taking on this after this all happened. Let's listen to what she said today earlier in court. All right, so that was Emanuela Arnard Carr, and basically she went to the hospital and asked Jennifer for a statement after all of this happened. She talked a little bit about Jennifer's behavior as well and her reaction, and the reaction from the Rosenbaum. She was saying Jennifer said her eyes were dry. She didn't know why she wasn't crying. Joseph, what do you think when you hear all this?
Well, I think that she's portraying an individual that is without feeling, potentially. My eyes are dry, I'm not crying. I think one of the really troubling things for me, though, is I don't know how much validity to assign to an investigation that's conducted by DFACS. Because if they had been on their toes to begin with, we wouldn't be in the midst of what we're in right now. And this is not just aimed at the state of Georgia for their family and child welfare services. This is a systemic problem that runs through the country. And unfortunately, little children are paying the price.
Yeah, and that's an interesting point you bring up, because one of the things that we've seen through this trial is really that DFACS has kind of been burned, and they've gotten a bad rap. They had people that were fired because of this. Is this going to make it challenging for the jury to kind of separate the two parts of this? Because DFACS is its own thing over here, but then you have this murder trial of the child. Because DFACS is under fire, does that maybe plant a seed in a juror's mind that's like, well, if they're in the wrong, obviously then the parents have to be in the wrong too?
No, I think those two things kind of cancel each other out. I think the jury is bright enough to be able to separate these two things. We've got somebody that's allegedly engaged in abusive behavior directed toward this poor little angel. The other thing that will not be addressed and will continue to go on down the same road. I've been doing this for a long, long time, and I'm telling you, I've been involved with cases involving DFACS in Georgia, Family Child Services in Louisiana. It was the same 25, 30 years ago. It's the same today. It will continue to be the same. So nothing that they do right here will make any substantive changes in the system itself. As for the parents that are charged in this particular case, I think the prosecution will do a sufficient job to paint them in the light in which they're currently painting them in, and I think that the jury will buy into that in the end.
All right, well, she goes on to talk a little bit more about the injuries and more of what she found when she took the case and had to sort of assess this whole situation. So let's listen to Emanuela. All right, so that was Emanuela on the stand again, and that was her during her cross-examination. So the defense was questioning her there. Joseph, where do you think the defense was trying to go with that? I mean, I know, they were trying to say maybe that these injuries were not inflicted by the parents, but it was an accident, because she talked about the butter knife and all these other things.
Yeah, I don't think that that dog will hunt. Sticking a butter knife down the throat to clear the airway. When sufficient would have been to sweep the airway with your fingers. Maybe they're making a comment about the butter knife into the airway to throw the investigators off the scent, because there may have been other trauma there. And as far as there's another piece here, she talks about dropping the child from a height of a foot to 2 feet off of the ground, which is wholly bizarre, and that these injuries, at least per this investigator, and her interview with the mom had stated that, or the foster mom had stated that, she was doing compressions, and this explains this transection of the pancreas. Well, what is it? Is it the compressions, or is it the Heimlich maneuver? Because I want specificity here. I want to know exactly what it is. And, these two things anatomically just do not match up. If you're doing compressions on an individual, she could have said, well, I was doing compressions on her and I broke her foot while I was doing the compressions. It's not anatomically compatible. The child's pancreas was transected. It was literally split in two. So a lot of this stuff is not marrying up. The defense is, again, we're at one of these points in these cases like this where the defense is simply doing their job and they're working with what they have. The problem is they're like a fly caught on fly paper.
And one of the things that I was going to ask you that you already mentioned was how they talked about dropping this child. That just seems so outlandish. Like, I don't really understand that, and obviously that's gonna take a toll on a tiny kid.
Yeah, and again, let me go back to the jurors here. The jurors, and I'm just speculating here. For all I know, none of these jurors have any children, but odds are they at least have contact with small children in their family, and if not, they might actually be parents. They're thinking to themselves, this is wildly fantastical here. What's trying to be sold to me as a juror, and I'm just not buying it because these injuries don't marry up, and you can never, the elephant in the room here is this aging of the bruising, this evidence that has been documented over and over, both in both children, relative to what's going on. I go back to my earlier statement when we first opened today, where I was discussing the broken leg and how she let this child linger and languish in pain for 2 days prior to starting treatment. This is cringeworthy stuff.
All right, Joseph Scott Morgan, thank you. We're going to take a break right now. Plenty more when we come back. Stay with us on Law and Crime. All right, so this is really important here because this is Samantha White, and she's actually one of the people that Layla's biological parents have now filed a lawsuit against. So Anthony, Daniel, and Tessa Clendenning, which are the biological parents, filed a lawsuit against the Georgia Department of Human Services, Samantha White, who you just heard from, Tamara Warner, Jennifer Rosenbaum, and Joseph Rosenbaum. This was filed on September 19th of 2016. It's still open, but of course, this is in response to these shortcomings and shortfallings we've seen from the defects here. Joseph, when you hear all this and when you listen to Samantha White, and we know, that defects kind of has a microscope on it because of this, what are your reaction to that?
Again, I'm an uber cynic here because nothing will change. People might receive a bit of money and this sort of thing. But let's think about the defects workers themselves. They work within a structure that is very faulty, and they are the ones that are being scapegoated in this, as opposed to the higher ups, the administrators, the ultimate administrators that have been placed in these positions, and then of course the legislatures that draw up the laws for these organizations. There's nothing that these people could have done. Just imagine, if you will, your task with dealing with a group of dysfunctional people and their lives, and taking these precious little children and placing them in homes, and you have no idea as a worker of what's going on in these homes every minute of every second of every minute of every day. It's an impossible task. It's kind of like spitting in the ocean to raise the water level. It doesn't do too much good. And that's what these people are faced with. And it has, again, I beat this drum all the time to my students at Jacksonville State that are training in forensics. You see this repeated over and over and over again. And those of us on the periphery that are forensics people, we look at this and we shake our head. We're in the morgues. We see these bodies come through. We shake our heads and we think, when will this ever end? Physicians are the same way that work in emergency rooms and pediatric clinics. They see these kids come through with bumps and bruises and nasty injuries and neglect and malnourishment that we've talked about, and there's nothing you can do. It just goes on and on and on.
All right, Joseph Scott Morgan, great insight there. We're going to take a break right now on Law and Crime. Stay with us, though. We'll continue to break this down when we come back.